This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Gather round, lock your doors, and maybe pour yourself something strong, because today we are headed to West Texas, where the sky is big, the heat is oppressive, and one murder was just about as twisted and tangled as a pile of barbed wire in a dust storm. That was a lot of interesting sayings that I included in there. The setting where we are going today is Lubbock, Texas, known for college football and Buddy Holly. But after today, you will never hear the name Lubbock without thinking about a Gatorade bottle, silver bars, a jealous plastic surgeon, and a case so shocking it sounds like a bad Lifetime movie. Except this one's real. Hi, guys. Welcome to Death by Southwest. It is raining. Of course, I chose to record right when it started thunderstorming. So we'll see how this goes. I don't know if you can hear the rain or if it's going to be distracting. I'll do my best to edit it out if it is as loud as it sounds like it is to me. I hope you guys are having a wonderful week. As per usual, I'm not going to get into anything personal. And we're just going to jump right into the story. So let's talk about Lubbock, Texas. I've driven through Lubbock. I actually think I've stayed in Lubbock with Izzy, who was my very beloved bulldog for anyone who's new here. And we used to drive cross country because my family was here in Tucson and I was in Atlanta. So I believe I've stayed in Lubbock, but nothing terribly memorable about it. So researching it, it was kind of like I was learning about it for the first time as well. So let me paint you a picture. Lubbock is not the place where you would expect like anything crazy, like a murder for hire plot to kind of unravel. Or, I mean, maybe it is because it kind of has that like eerie, wide open feeling that makes you want to look twice at your neighbors a little bit and then perhaps lock your doors. It's set smack in the middle of the Texas High Plains. So it is flat. And when I say flat, I mean shockingly flat, like pancake flat. Like if your dog ran away, you could see where he went for like 3 days because it's just completely flat. You can see it forever. There's no mountains, no hills, just miles of sky and cotton fields. But do not let the empty horizon fool you. It is a very lively and bustling place to live, actually. The population is just over 260,000, and the vibe is somewhere between small town charm and I'm like spying on you through my blinds, suburban neighbor type energy. It's also a college town, home to Texas Tech University. So there's a steady stream of football fanatics and frat guys. And at the heart of the city, maybe in the opening, you heard me mention Buddy Holly, and that's at the heart of the city. Buddy Holly's glasses, like eyeglasses, are immortalized in a statue downtown, kind of watching over the chaos that happens in Lubbock. The people are friendly, but cautious. People who like will wave at you from their front porch, but they also have like 4 guns just inside the door, just in case. Church is big, barbecue is big, and gossip is big. And when something goes wrong, like say a beloved doctor is found murdered, everyone knows about it within hours, if not minutes, because in Lubbock, the gossip grapevine often runs faster than the Wi-Fi. It's the kind of place where secrets definitely do not stay buried for long, even if they're 6 feet under the cotton fields. So, before we get into the bloodshed and betrayal of this episode, let's talk about the man at the center of it all. Because Dr. Joseph Saunier wasn't just another name in a police report. He was a father, a grandfather, a doctor, a dancer, and someone who, by all accounts, didn't have a single enemy in the world. which makes what happened to him all the more disturbing. So Joseph Saunier was born and raised in Shreveport, Louisiana, which, side note, I have been there once and I loved it. He was a Southern boy through and through, bright, curious, and very ambitious from a young age. He wasn't just smart; he was like that annoyingly smart kind of smart, the kind of guy who aced every single test without ever having to really open a book. He graduated summa cum laude. I never know how to pronounce those accolades from Louisiana State University in 1976. And then he powered through medical school at LSU's School of Medicine in Shreveport. After that, he completed his residency in pathology in Dallas, where he was chosen as chief resident because, like I said, he was very smart. Of course, he was. He had the kind of career that most people spend their whole lives chasing. He became a partner at DPA Laboratories in Lubbock and later sold it to Ameripath, where he stayed on as medical director and chief pathologist at Covenant Medical Hospital. His colleagues constantly praised his brilliance, the way that he was a sharp dresser, and the intense integrity that he lived by. Patients and employees alike enjoyed and adored his warmth. He was a very warm, likable guy, and he seemed to always make time for everyone, patients, friends, family, employees. Even if he didn't have the time, he made the time. And but behind all of that professional success, his personal life had a little bit of heartbreak in it. So he'd married his high school sweetheart, Becky Gallegos. I really wanted to say that differently. When he was just 19, they had two sons, James and Joseph the Fourth. Everyone called Joseph the Fourth Dallas. And for a pretty long while, life was really good, stable. Some might even say picture perfect. They seemed to have the kind of marriage that you might refer to as like old fashioned, but in a good way. They were happy by everyone's accounts, and they were together for 27 years. And then, just like that, it was over. In 2001, Becky left Joseph for another man. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, the only woman he'd ever loved was suddenly gone, and Joseph was understandably completely crushed. Remember, they met at 19, so he'd never really dated anyone else. He'd only ever dated her. He built his entire world, life, family, everything around this woman. So when she left, he was understandably just kind of adrift in life, heartbroken, confused, and didn't really know who he was without her. But he didn't spiral, amazingly. He didn't turn bitter. He instead turned inward and then outward. Over the next decade, he poured himself into his work and his family and himself. And eventually, he found something that was pretty unexpected for him that he didn't think he would ever find again. And that was joy. Started with his grandkids. He was completely obsessed with them, Joseph the Fifth and Camilla. He flew out to see them whenever he could, bought them gifts. He was the kind of grandfather who would sit on the floor and make silly voices and play with them and have tea parties. He adored them, and he adored being a grandfather, and he was a good grandfather. And somewhere along the way of trying to rebuild his life over a decade, which sounds like a very long time, but after spending 3 decades with somebody and then being completely like blindsided and crushed by them, it seems reasonable to take a decade to kind of rebuild yourself back up. So along the way, when he was rebuilding his life, he found joy in some unexpected places. He discovered a passion for ballroom dancing, not just salsa or swing. He did all of it, all different kinds of dancing. And he was apparently really, really good at it and became like a regular fixture at the local dance community or in the local dance community. And the ladies were lining up to dance with him, not just because he had great rhythm, but because he had this presence about him that he had his whole life and throughout, in his both his personal and career, kind of a quiet confidence and a an elegant Southern charm. Wasn't just dancing that he found joy in life from again. He loved good wine, good food. I mean, who doesn't? And he started dabbling in perfumery. Yeah, you heard me right. Perfumery. Blending French essential oils into custom colognes, which he did in his laundry room, apparently, just for fun, which is interesting. He had money in the bank, a sprawling 5,600 square foot home with a wine cellar. He had enough tailored suits to make James Bond jealous. And more than that, he had a sense of peace after this kind of hard decade that he had. He had this calmness about him. Years of being heartbroken, he worked through it and he found happiness again just on his own. But unfortunately, his story was about to go from charming to chilling for the first of two times in this episode that we'll talk about. So this was the first time his kind of he already went through this heartbreak, but on July 12th, 2010, Becky, his high school sweetheart and ex-wife of a while now, the woman that he took nearly a decade to get over, was murdered by the man that she had left Joseph for. It happened in Amarillo, Texas. And after the man, his name is Mark Ray Acosta, that's who Becky left Joseph for. He killed Becky and then killed himself. So it was a domestic violence murder suicide. Joseph was understandably devastated. Um, he kind of kept a quiet, stoic, public facing persona. Like he didn't lose it in the public. He really didn't make many comments. There wasn't a lot about how he felt about this, handled this, whatever. He dealt with this in his own way. Unfortunately for him and for the rest of his family, this would not be the only tragedy that the Saulniers had to face. So, our story today kind of starts with a no-show. That's it, just a man who didn't come to work. But when that man is Dr. Joseph Saulnier, it isn't just like a skipped meeting or a missed alarm. It's a glaring red flag to the people who knew him best. It was July 11th, 2012, in Lubbock, Texas. It was hot, the kind of hot that made everything feel heavy. Your clothes, your shoes, your bones, even your thoughts. Everything just feels heavy in that like stifling heat. By 10 a.m. on July 11th, the city of Lubbock already had that kind of West Texas shimmer that, when the pavement it's so hot that it looks like the pavement is moving. The air is buzzing with cicadas, which always come out in the heat. And at Ameripath, the pathology lab where Joseph was medical director, Mary Lou Trevino was getting anxious because Joseph hadn't shown up. He hadn't called, and this was not normal, not at all like him. Like it was, look, I run late. I run late. It's a very rude habit, but I'm always late, a few minutes late usually. I really am trying to break that habit. But so if I didn't show up for something, I think people would be annoyed before they would be concerned. So, but for Joseph, we all know somebody like that who is just punctual. Punctual? Nope. Punctual and always punctual. And that was Joseph. So there was no annoyance. There was only concern when he didn't show up and he didn't call. So Mary Lou did what any concerned colleague who kind of like had a bad gut feeling already would do. She sent somebody to check on him. There was a courier named Mary Rodriguez, a very loyal employee who always does whatever's asked of them. And so Mary Lou Trevino said to Mary Rodriguez, just go swing by, see if his car's there, maybe knock on the door. It's probably nothing, but let's just be sure. Okay. Mary Rodriguez thought, okay, no problem, right? Wrong. Mary arrived at Joseph's house, his gorgeous, sprawling home, and saw two familiar faces outside, Becky and Nathan. Not Becky, his ex wife, who was murdered. This is a different Becky. Becky and Nathan were the landscaping crew. They were trimming hedges, watering the lawn, normal landscaping things. Mary asked them if they'd seen Joseph, and they both said no. He hadn't come outside or waved or said hi. And this was also a little bit strange because he was a very, very friendly man. And he knew these landscapers quite well, apparently. So it was not common for him to not say hello, wave, something. And Becky and Nathan and Mary thought, well, he didn't show up for work and he hasn't popped out to say hi. This all is kind of weird. Let's just investigate a little bit. I'm not sure why I guess Becky and Nathan didn't know that he hadn't shown up for work. So maybe they just thought he was busy and that's why he hadn't popped his head out. Anyways, the three of them decided, let's take a lap around the property, look in the windows, let's see what's going on. After they knocked on the door and it wasn't answered. So knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, no answer. So then they walked around the house. And as they got to the back of the house, Mary just felt like something was wrong. Something was off. And then they saw that a window had been completely pushed in, not broken or cracked, just like the whole entire window, including the frame, had been just shoved in and was now lying inside the house. Like someone had kicked it in with surgical precision and then just stepped through. It wasn't necessarily violent because it wasn't even really broken. It was more intentional. Mary froze. She was immediately worried and terrified. Becky, luckily, was still thinking rationally. She immediately took out her phone and called 911. And Nathan did something that kind of walks the line between like heroic and pretty stupid. He said, I'll go in. And he climbed in through the open window into Joseph's house and into the unknown, which I would not have done personally. But okay. So he made his way through the house to the front door and let Mary in and Becky, I believe. They began to search the house and immediately realized that something was wrong. The living room looked not normal. The coffee table was flipped over. There was a glass that was shattered on the ground. There were visible scratches on the hardwood floor, like long, deep ones, like something had been dragged. And then, of course, there was the blood. Not a ton of blood that they saw at first. It was tiny at first, just like a little smear here, a drop here. And then they started following the blood and it grew into a much more intense blood trail and kind of wound its way through the house like a sick breadcrumb path guiding them towards the garage. Mary walked into the garage first. The air inside was heavy. She kind of scanned the garage before fully stepping inside, saw familiar shapes, Joseph's different cars, his storage shelves, the, a pretty normal looking garage of a man who lived pretty tidily and neatly. But then she looked down and she saw 2 feet, human feet, sticking out from behind one of the cars. She she was like, no, no. She said, Nathan, you go look. Nathan was somehow still kind of calm and he walked around the car and there he was, Dr. Joseph Saunier, lying in a big pool of blood. He had very clearly been shot multiple times. And if that wasn't enough, it appeared that he had also been stabbed. His life looked like it had ended right there in that garage. A man who had danced under the lights of Paris, who had rebuilt himself after heartbreak, who had spent his life healing others and fixing things that most of us probably couldn't even pronounce, had died alone, brutally and violently. And what police would soon uncover wouldn't just be a mystery. It would be, well, a big mystery, fueled by arrogance, obsession, and the kind of delusion that will really make your skin crawl. So the Lubbock police were on the scene within minutes. And at first, like any good detective, Zach Johnson tried to stay practical, focused, objective. But the minute he stepped inside Joseph Saunier's house, that changed. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This didn't even seem like a crime of passion or opportunity. No, this felt methodical, calculated. Like someone didn't just want Joseph dead, they wanted him silenced permanently. They locked down the scene. The evidence teams moved in. And the first thing they noticed is that nothing seemed to be taken. There was lots of expensive electronics still there, not touched, plenty of jewelry, a high-end wine collection, expensive watches. Everything was still there, which means that this wasn't about stuff. This wasn't about things. This was about him. This was about Joseph. And as the evidence teams were going through, they noticed something tucked kind of in the corner of the dining room that no one had noticed before. A Gatorade bottle. Not like an empty Gatorade bottle that was, somebody tried to throw it in the trash and missed and it ended up on the floor. No, this one was lying there like intentionally, like this whole entire scene kind of felt so far, like it was all very intentional. And it had something inside of it, fibers, tape, and some black residue. At first glance, it did look like trash. At second glance, it looked like someone made a silencer, like for a gun. Now, if you're like me, I was thinking you can't use a plastic bottle as a silencer. I mean, I've seen in the movies like, a pill, they'll use a pillow or something like that. I even think in one episode that we've done on here, ooh, it's coming to me in bits and pieces. Somebody used like a tissue, a toilet paper roll with stuff stuffed inside. I could be making that up. Anyways, never heard of a Gatorade bottle being used. But apparently, with the right kind of gun, with a small caliber pistol, a thick plastic bottle stuffed with padding can muffle the sound of a shot. Now, not going to make it totally silent, but quieter than it would be without that Gatorade bottle stuffed with padding. So now the detectives have a makeshift silencer and no signs of any forced entry outside of just that one window, which is forced entry. But again, weirdly, like neatly, like popped out, like almost like a handyman did it. That was it. Nothing else was taken. And there, at this point, is no other evidence except for the blood. So they follow the blood, which started in the dining room near an overturned chair and a broken glass, which is where they assume the attack began. And then it moved, drops of blood, then a streak, then more drops, heavier drops, all the way to the garage where they are now to believing that Joseph collapsed. So their very initial working theory was that Joseph was shot first in the dining room. He was bleeding, he was confused, and so he made his way to the garage, maybe to try and get in one of his cars, maybe to get his phone that was there. But whoever attacked him followed and then stabbed him 11 times. We call that overkill or rage or desperation or all of it. Now, although nothing appeared to be taken at first, once they found the body, they discovered that wasn't entirely true. Joseph's shoes were still on, his belt was still fastened, his wallet was still in his pocket, but his watch was missing, which was weird. This was a watch, a very nice watch that he wore every single day. He never forgot to wear it. So he would have been wearing it, but it wasn't on the body. It wasn't in the house. Also missing his cell phone, gone. Couldn't find it, which led police and detectives to think, did whoever do this want to erase something from the phone, maybe? Because those are two odd things to take. There was plenty of other watches in the house, just as expensive, other jewelry, other items of extreme value. Why take the watch off of his body and his cell phone, and that's it, and nothing else? We don't know yet. So early theories were swirling. Remember, this is Lubbock, it's a gossip town. So maybe a patient's family, a disgruntled employee, a jealous ex. But every person that Joseph worked with or Joseph knew said the same thing. He was loved, kind, fair, supportive. In terms of the people that worked for him, he was the kind of boss that you don't just respect, but the kind of boss that you actually like. Like people liked him a lot. His employees liked him. So police moved on, okay, maybe it's not somebody that he works with. Let's look at his romantic life. Who was he dating? Was there someone new in his life? And it turns out there was. Her name was Rochelle. She was beautiful, blonde, recently divorced, and apparently deeply in love with Joseph. So detectives gave her a call. And what she had to say changed everything. Now, if you'd asked Dr. Joseph Saunier 5 years earlier whether he thought he'd ever fall in love again, he probably would have laughed or cried or both. Because after 27 years of marriage to his high school sweetheart, his world imploded when she left him for another man. And like I said before, it wasn't this dramatic, like rage, punch holes in the wall type heartbreak. It was this like quiet, aching heartbreak that he suffered from for years. So starting over at 50 years old felt kind of impossible for him. Not to mention that as soon as he kind of got his life back on track, then she had this tragic death. But then in late 2011, he met Rochelle Shatina. And for the first time in a long time, Joseph felt that possibility of love again. They met the way that all second chance at love stories meet, the best way possible, on the dance floor. As I mentioned, Joseph had gotten into ballroom dancing as kind of a like post-divorce therapy. And Rochelle, she had been dragged to a salsa class by a friend, and then she never looked back because she met Joseph. She was tall, blonde, beautiful, and elegant in a way that kind of makes you stand up a little straighter without even realizing it. She had 4 children, a full life, and a very sharp sense of humor. She'd been married twice and divorced twice. The first was to her high school sweetheart, and the second was to a man named Thomas Shatina, an engineer who left her for a married woman. Lots of people leaving each other for other people here. The second divorce was hard on Rochelle. It stung, but she pushed forward and was trying to rebuild her life as well, similarly to Joseph. After her second divorce, she dated a little bit, but nothing really stuck until Joseph. This charming, silver-haired pathologist with, a wardrobe, like I mentioned, like that would make James Bond jealous. He had so many nice suits. Everything had a pocket square, and he just had this kind of quiet swagger, and he just immediately swept her off her feet. And she equally swept him off his feet. They were a really good match. They looked physically perfect together. Handsome doctor, graceful French woman. They moved quickly. but not recklessly. They traveled, they took weekend trips, they danced, they cooked. Joseph taught Rochelle about wine, and she brought this amazing energy and laughter back into his life that had been missing for so long. Joseph's sons adored Rochelle. His grandkids adored her. She went with him on a trip to California to visit them, and she was wonderful with the kids. They were in their 50s, but apparently acted like college sweethearts. They had that like giddy, can't stop smiling kind of, pinch me, is this real? This is so amazing, this love type feeling, like most relationships are in the early days, that very honeymoon period. But this honeymoon period for them lasted, well, until it didn't. In June of 2012, just weeks before Joseph's murder, they took the kind of trip that people dream of. They took this amazing dream trip to Paris. And they did the whole, I'm going to slaughter this, but pom- I'm not going to try, where you put a lock on the bridge and then you throw the key into the river as a symbol of unbreakable love. They did that. They put a lock up there to symbolize their unbreakable love. But in their case, that unbreakable love only lasted for 3 more weeks after they did that. When police first called Rochelle Shatina, she answered and was in tears. She was distraught. She told detectives that Joseph wasn't just her boyfriend, he was the love of her life. And they'd just gotten back from Paris where they had promised forever to each other. And now, just weeks later, she's sitting at home, sobbing to detectives, trying to make sense of the fact that Joseph had been murdered in cold blood. But as police are talking to Rochelle, she said something unsettling. She said, I think someone's been watching us. Okay. Police were like, wow, this escalated quickly. She was crying and just couldn't even believe it or make sense of it. And now somebody's been watching them. She said there were moments, small, strange, kind of creepy things that happened in the weeks before Joseph's murder. At the time, she'd brushed them off, like she was being paranoid. It was, she was overthinking something. She didn't think it was anything. She clocked it, but then kind of brushed it away. But now, thinking back, maybe she brushed it away too soon. The first incident happened when she was at the gym. She was mid workout and she noticed a man standing at the door staring at her, not working out, not talking to anyone, just standing there watching her. And like he was waiting. And she said it made her feel very weird. It was creepy. Another time, she and Joseph were drinking wine in his living room when it seemed like a camera was flashing outside of the window, like someone had been taking pictures of them from the backyard. Joseph and Rochelle both freaked out. They didn't find anybody on the property, but Joseph changed the locks on his house and his gate like that week, shortly after that happened. And then there was a letter, an anonymous note signed, well, it's not really anonymous, I guess, signed by someone claiming to be Tina, said that Joseph had paid her for sex. Like she was like a full escort. Rochelle didn't believe it for a second. The note read kind of like a Lifetime movie script. She figured it was, maybe it was like an ex that was trying to cause drama. I mean, although Joseph didn't have any exes because the only ex he had been murdered already. So, as Rochelle's telling detectives this, they said, well, did Joseph have any exes that didn't like him? Rochelle said, no, actually, not really. She thought maybe he had dated the dance instructor at the dance place where they danced briefly, but she wasn't even sure. And if he did, it wasn't anything serious. So then they said, okay, well, what about you? Do you have any exes that could be problematic? And Rochelle paused and said, well, yeah, actually, I do. Enter Dr. Thomas Michael Dixon. His friends, and we're going to use that term loosely, his friends called him Mike. Rochelle met Mike in such a romantic way. She walked into his med spa for a little Botox. He was married at the time, but that did not stop him from flirting a lot with Rochelle. He began showing up at all of her appointments. So, like, he didn't need to, there were nurses and other people to administer her Botox, but he made sure that he was there every time she came in. He found her on Facebook and friended her. And as he saw her more and more when she would come into the office, he confessed to her that he was pretty unhappy in his marriage. And then, I know we'll all be shocked by this, he left his wife for Rochelle. He told Rochelle she was his angel, his salvation, his everything. She'd rescued him from a unhappy life. And Rochelle kind of fell for it. She fell pretty hard for Mike for a while. She also texted him things like, "You're my soulmate." They apparently were talking about starting a business together, combining his medical expertise and her infectious energy, apparently. So for a moment, Mike and Rochelle were hot and heavy. But, like all good midlife crises wrapped up in a potential medical malpractice situation, it didn't last. It didn't last. The cracks started to show pretty quickly. Mike's adult children did not like Rochelle at all, and they caused a lot of drama, apparently. And Mike started getting pretty possessive, jealous, and just kind of exhausting. Rochelle told him, "This just isn't working anymore. It's just too hard. I think we're done." She ended it. And then Joseph very quickly came along unexpectedly after Mike. After she broke up with Mike, she soon after met Joseph, charming, stable, emotionally available. And so she moved on. Mike Dixon did not. So Detective Johnson is taking this all in as Rochelle is telling him, and his cop sixth sense starts buzzing. So he said, "Rochelle, do you have any of these old texts from Mike?" And she did. And as they started going through the text messages from Mike, they realized that they were painting a picture of a man who was spiraling into obsession. The text messages said things like, "You broke my heart. I gave up everything for you. You tossed me aside like garbage. He's a rebound." Oh, and the tea of the month club text. That's not a metaphor. That's actual, like we're talking about actual, a tea of the month subscription. So for her birthday, Mike had given Rochelle an annual delivery of exotic teas. Seems nice, I guess. But the problem was that Rochelle didn't drink tea, like at all. She didn't like it. And she felt like this gift was pretty impersonal. Apparently, she said as much to him, and he thought she was very ungrateful for saying that. And when the relationship went south and she broke up with him, he told anyone who would listen that she lost it over the tea. Like that was what ended their relationship because she had actually wanted a diamond ring. Rochelle says this never happened. All that she wanted was just a thoughtful gift for her birthday, something that showed that he'd been listening. Instead, she got like peppermint oolong and a breakup narrative built on herbal bitterness. So, guys, take note. If your girlfriend, wife doesn't drink tea, maybe don't get her a tea subscription because nothing says I haven't listened to anything you've said for 6 months like a subscription to something she'll never use. So Rochelle swore to detectives that she had no idea that Mike was still this obsessed with her or this upset with her. She told police she assumed he'd moved on. And we don't know that he's obsessed with her. Like police are reading this and he's like, "Oh, this guy's not over you." And she said, "Oh, I think that it's just I think he's just being dramatic. It's not a big deal. She said, I actually think he's dating like a 24-year-old medical student. Detectives weren't really convinced, though. And they weren't the only ones. One of Rochelle's good friends, Shayna, thought Mike could be dangerous and that Mike was obsessed with her. She told Rochelle, watch your back, because she had recently, apparently, Shayna, Rochelle's friend, had recently had dinner with Mike in Dallas. Don't know the circumstances there. And he had spent the whole night talking about Rochelle as if they were still together, but they weren't. So it was weird. So now detectives had a new target. So Detective Zach Johnson, excuse me, did not waste any time after he heard Rochelle's story that she thought she was being watched, the weird letter, the camera flashes, and the like seemingly emotionally unstable ex-boyfriend. He jumped in his car. He made the 2-hour drive north to Amarillo, straight to the front door of Dr. Mike Dixon. It was late when he got there. The sun had long since dipped below the flat horizon, and it was dark, hot, and hazy, and that kind of feeling like suffocating, almost like you're holding your breath. It's hard to describe uh, if you're not in the Southwest or haven't been the heat of the Southwest. It's a different kind of heat. I know that that's so cliche to say, but it really is. uh, However, Mike answered the door, even though it was late and hot and kind of weird feeling outside. Mike answered the door totally calmly, like too calmly. He had that kind of, a police officer shows up at your house late at night, knocking on your front door. I don't know. I think the best of us would be kind of like, huh, weird. But no, he acted like his money, his reputation, his status could protect him from anything, is how he seemed. Detective Johnson introduced himself, explained that he was investigating the homicide of Dr. Joseph Saunier. And Mike, he blinked and paused and said, I don't know who that is. Really, Mike? Because like days ago, you were just texting Rochelle about her new rebound, complaining how she dumped you for that guy. Mike knew exactly who Joseph was, but sure, okay, let's pretend he didn't. Detective Johnson was like, sure, I'll play along with you. He kept the conversation rolling. He asked Mike if he had had any contact with Rochelle recently, and Mike insisted that he hadn't spoken to her in months. Again, not true. And Rochelle had the text to prove it. Then Detective Johnson asked him about the relationship with Rochelle and how it ended and why. Mike said this that Mike said that he had broken things off with Rochelle because she went ballistic over a birthday gift. Yes, the tea of the month subscription. Rochelle obviously had already told detectives this wasn't true. She didn't expect a ring. She wasn't pushing for marriage. She just thought the gift sucked. And I mean, it kind of did. But Mike's version painted her as this like materialistic, overdramatic gold digger. Rochelle's version, she ended things with Mike because he was emotionally unstable and couldn't handle rejection. So who's lying here? Who do we think? Mike. So then came Detective Johnson's next big question. Where were you the night of the murder? Mike said he'd been out at a sushi restaurant with his new girlfriend, the 24-year-old medical student, a hot young alibi, and one that frustratingly checked out completely. He was at dinner that night. He had the receipts, and so did his date. So technically, Mike Dixon couldn't have actually pulled the trigger. But Detective Johnson just had this gut feeling about Mike Dixon, and he just was not ready to let this guy go. He felt pretty certain that Mike had something to do with this, even if he didn't kill Joseph himself. The the obsession, the stuff that Rochelle had been dealing with, the stalking, the letter, the bitter texts, it all pointed to a man that just couldn't let go. So what now? Well, there were no fingerprints found at the scene, no eyewitnesses. They didn't find a murder weapon. The trail was getting pretty chilly until 4 days later, when a man called the Lubbock crime line with a story so bizarre and so specific and so damning that it potentially had the ability to crack this case wide open. The caller's name was Paul Reynolds, and he was calling about a man named Dave Shepard. Hopefully, I haven't lost you guys. There's a lot of characters in here. So, Paul Reynolds, 4 days later after Joseph was discovered, called the crime line in Lubbock. And he identified himself as Paul Reynolds. He said, I'm a nurse who's fallen on hard times, and I'm crashing on the couch of an old friend in Amarillo. That friend is Dave Shepard. Now, describing Dave is a little bit like describing a human wrecking ball wrapped in cowboy clothing. Dave was 6'5", 380 pounds, divorced, unemployed, and known around Amarillo as Big Dave. And that's not just a nickname, that was his entire persona. Big Dave had a criminal record for burglary and embezzlement. He had a trail of failed business ventures, including a hot tub business that didn't work out. And he had a habit of inflating his resume to like cartoonish levels. He claimed to be a former private investigator, a deputy sheriff. He even claimed that he was special forces military. He was none of those things. He was, however, spiraling. Paul told detectives that in the days following Joseph Saunier's murder, Big Dave had been acting completely unhinged. He'd attempted suicide twice, was drinking very heavily, and kept muttering cryptic things about a doctor in Lubbock. And finally, one night, Big Dave cracked. He told Paul, through tears and rage, that he had killed a doctor, that it was a hit job arranged by another doctor friend in exchange for money. And not just cash. No, no. Big Dave said he was paid in silver bars. Yeah. Someone paid this disaster of a human silver, like bricks of silver, like we're in the Oregon Trail or something, to kill Joseph Saunier. At first, Paul was like, okay, buddy, sure. Yeah, right. He thought this was just drunken nonsense, that Dave must have read the article about Joseph's murder and just, he was not doing well. He was spiraling. He was drinking a lot. But then Paul did a little Googling. And there it was. The actual story of Dr. Joseph Saunier's murder in Lubbock, shot and stabbed in his home, just like Big Dave said. So Paul did what any sane, respectable human would do. He picked up the phone and he called the police. Detective Johnson, with now a shiny new lead to investigate, he obviously zeroed in on Big Dave Shepard. And what he found was a walking, talking liability. But let's learn a little bit more about Dave first. So Big Dave was a single father of 3 girls. He was an Army veteran, just not like the special forces like he would lie about sometimes. And he was a serial job hopper. One month he was managing a Domino's. The next he was trying to launch hot tubs to go out of a trailer. At one point he embezzled nearly $30,000 from a construction company, which actually only got him 10 years probation. And by 2010 he was broke aimless, and bitter. And it was around that time that he struck up a real friendship with none other than Dr. Mike Dixon. The two had met years earlier at a cigar shop. And back then, when they had met, they were like casual acquaintances who shared a love of overpriced cigars and complaining about their wives. But by 2010, both Big Dave and Dr. Mike Dixon were divorced and pretty miserable. So they kind of trauma bonded. And when Mike started ranting about his ex-girlfriend Rochelle, how she dumped him, humiliated him, and replaced him with another rich doctor, Big Dave offered a solution. He said, "Do you want her back? Because I could help." Now, at first, it was nothing violent. It was just two guys talking. The initial plan was to just embarrass Joseph, get some dirt on him, break the happy couple up, and make Rochelle come crawling back to Mike. Didn't seem like a great plan to me. I mean, seems kind of like some real delusional, like man fantasy going on here, but okay. Dave pitched himself as a private investigator. He told Mike he had the skills to dig up secrets. He could follow Joseph around without being noticed. He could take photos. No one would know he was there. He could do it all. Mike was Mike was sold. He was all in. He took Dave on a little surveillance tour of Lubbock. He pointed out Joseph's house, Rochelle's house, the dance studio where they met. Big Dave and Mike Dixon even sat and watched Joseph and Rochelle in dance class dancing through binoculars like a couple of rear window extras that were rejected. Then they went and grabbed some hot wings at Buffalo Wild Wings like it was just a regular Tuesday. This could have, at this point, remained just like a pathetic little spy game. But Dave had to take it a little further. He started stalking Joseph, following him to work, to dance class. He was trying to catch him cheating or doing something underhanded or sneaky. But Joseph wasn't cheating. He was 100% in it with Rochelle, like head over heels. No secret girlfriends, no scandal. There really wasn't any dirt to be found on Joseph. Not to mention that Big Dave was a pretty bad PI. He'd lose Joseph constantly when he was following him and then be like, fuck it, I give up. And he'd go smoke cigars and text Mike things like, nothing to report today. So Big Dave decided to pivot. The PI thing wasn't working. He wasn't finding any dirt on Joseph. So he bought a book called Getting Even, the complete book of dirty tricks. And yes, this is a real book. So Big Dave, started getting creative. He subscribed Joseph to gay porn magazines, hoping someone at the office would find them. I mean, we're in like what, 2012 here? Is that really that big of a deal? I feel like that's stupid, but fine. Big Dave forged letters. He took, remember the letter from the supposed escort that Joseph paid. Big Dave took flash photos through Joseph's windows to scare him, which it did. Big Dave was the one at the gym staring at Rochelle like a creeper. He was trying to freak them out. And I mean, he did a little bit. Joseph changed the locks, whatnot, but like, where was he going with all this? Not like there was no end game here. So Mike and Dave started talking about Plan B. The texts between them, which were recovered later, obviously, weren't texts of like two very smart men being subtle about some kind of plan that they were hatching. These were stupid things to be texting each other. Like, did you give Plan B any thought? Absolutely. Haven't stopped thinking. Good possibility. Stay close. Okay, go get him. Get her done. That was an actual text. I did not make that up. Mike Dixon literally texted get her done. Get her done about murdering someone. About murdering someone. I feel like Larry the Cable Guy might not like that, but So as Joseph and Rochelle flew off to Paris for Rochelle's 50th birthday, Mike Dixon panicked. He was convinced that Joseph was going to propose and then he would lose Rochelle forever. So when Joseph and Rochelle get back from Paris, Mike's texts are to Big Dave are getting urgent, desperate. And on July 10th, Big Dave drove to Lubbock. It's July 10th, 2012, and Big Dave is driving the nearly 2 hours from Amarillo to Lubbock, thinking that he is a man with a plan. He has a gun, a knife, a pair of gloves, and a Gatorade bottle that he has modified into a makeshift silencer because, you know, nothing says criminal genius like a murder kit made from convenience store garbage. Big Dave did not text Mike that day, though, not at least that we know of. There were no last minute pep talks, no like, you got this, man, go do it, which you would kind of expect after their previous text exchanges. It was just a long, silent drive across the Texas plains. And sometime late that night, Dave pulled up near Joseph Saunier's house. He parked away from the property. He walked through the side yard. And then he popped that window, frame and all, and he waited inside the house for Joseph to come home, armed and silent, waiting in the dark. According to Dave's later confession, when Joseph finally walked in through the front door and stepped into the dining room, he was caught completely off guard. Dave didn't say a word. He just lifted the gun, a .380 caliber pistol, and started firing through the Gatorade bottle. It wasn't silent, but it was quiet enough. Joseph was hit. He stumbled backwards, blood spattered on the wall, the floor. But Joseph wasn't dead. He got up. He tried to make his way towards the garage. Again, maybe hoping to get to his car, find a phone, something. But Dave was close behind. And when he decided he was done using the gun, he pulled out the knife and stabbed Joseph 11 times. And then Dave checked for a pulse and confirmed that Joseph was indeed dead. And then Dave walked out the same way he came in, through that window, got back in his car, drove back to Amarillo, and cashed in, literally. Remember, silver bars. He had taken them from Mike Dixon as payment, 3 of them, worth about $9,000 total, apparently. He had pawned one before the murder as like down payment, and then he pawned the other 2 after, once the job was done. Seemed like the plan had worked. Joseph was dead. Rochelle was devastated. And Mike Dixon was seemingly the innocent ex, just, sipping his green tea with his 24-year-old alibi, acting like he hadn't just outsourced a murder. And by mid-July to end of July, things were looking bleak for investigators. Yes, Detective Johnson had a strong feeling that Mike Dixon was involved. And yes, Dave Shepard, Big Dave, was sketchy as hell. But gut feelings don't win court cases. And at this point, there's really no physical evidence tying either of them directly to the murder scene until, of course, Paul Reynolds' tip comes in with Big Dave. Because now they have a name that is connected to Mike. So now they're going to build their case off this. That was a little confusing how I explained that. Sorry. So on July 16th, police arrested Dave Shepard and Mike Dixon, slapped both of them with $10 million bond. It was bold and aggressive, but police wanted to make a statement and keep the men from disappearing. Here's the problem. All the circumstantial evidence is pretty damning. The obsessive texts, the silver bars, the connection between Mike and Dave. But none of it proved that Mike had ordered this hit. They did have the Gatorade bottle, yes, And it eventually did come back with Dave Shepard's DNA on it. The gun, the .380 pistol, it was found in a lake behind Mike Dixon's office. And it just so happened to be registered to Mike's brother, which I mean, like I'm learning about this story, researching this. And in my head, I'm like, this is so obvious. Like, duh. If this was a movie, I'd be like, no, rewrite it. This is too obvious. Still, somehow this wasn't enough. All of it could be explained away, by a halfway decent defense attorney. And Mike was not talking. He clammed up the second that after he talked that night to Detective Johnson, he lawyered up and he, just kept sipping on his metaphorical tea, denying everything, any involvement. So detectives made a strategic decision. Now, look, at this point, this is why what I said before is confusing. At this point, Dave Shepard hasn't confessed. They just have the tip from Paul Reynolds, who called it in. So they're thinking, all right, Mike's not talking. Maybe Big Dave will. So they sat him down and they made a deal. If he told them everything, gave them the full story, and if he agreed to testify against Mike Dixon, they would take the death penalty off the table. And, look, we're in Texas where lethal injection is practically part of the penal code. So this was a big bargaining chip. So finally, it took a while, but in October of 2012, Dave Shepard finally confessed. And the story that he told them was kind of what they had imagined, like what they had put together from Paul Reynolds' tip combined with the Gatorade bottle and, everything they'd found. According to Dave, it started as a favor to his friend Mike. The original idea was just to dig up dirt on Joseph, embarrass him, and ruin his relationship. But when Joseph turned out to be squeaky clean, Mike started pushing for something more. Dave said Mike wanted Joseph hurt. He wanted him out of the way. Dave said that he even asked Mike point blank, "Are you sure you want him dead?" And Mike replied, "Doesn't bother me." So Dave, put on his little PI hat, started following Joseph, taking photos, bought that stupid Getting Even book, subscribed Joseph to gay porn. And when all this like childish sabotage failed, he did what he thought Mike wanted. He snuck into Joseph's house, shot him, stabbed him, left him dead in the garage, and took his silver bar blood money home. His confession was detailed, corroborated by evidence, and made perfect sense. It fit everything that the police had, all the circumstantial evidence, all of their theories. It all worked together perfectly. He even led police to where he had the silver bars that he hadn't pawned yet, which was physical proof that matched Mike Dixon's financial records. So this was it. They were like, we got it. We have our hitman. We have the mastermind behind it. This is a slam dunk case. Or so they thought. Because when the case went to trial in 2014 and Shepard took the stand to testify against Dixon, something happened that unfortunately nobody saw coming. He recanted everything. Straight-faced, under oath, in front of everyone, he looked at the jury and said, Mike Dixon had nothing to do with it. I acted alone. What? Prosecutors were stunned. Rochelle and Joseph's sons were devastated. Well, Joseph's sons were devastated. Rochelle was devastated. And Shepard's own daughters, Big Dave's, remember daughters? He has 3 daughters. They were in the courtroom that day supporting Joseph's family. So they weren't there for their dad, the murderer. They were there for the victim, for Joseph's family. They broke down crying as soon as Big Dave recanted. After this, they visited Big Dave in prison and they confronted him. His own daughters called him a monster, told him that he'd betrayed them and And every ounce of truth that they thought that he had left, like any ability to be a good man that he had left, it was now gone. They were hoping to convince him to like recant his recanting. But Big Dave didn't budge. And with his testimony pretty much destroyed, the jury couldn't agree on a verdict. The case deadlocked, and Mike Dixon walked out of the courtroom smiling as a free man. But hold on, the story doesn't end there because the prosecution was not done yet. After the first trial collapsed into a mistrial and Mike Dixon walked out of the court like a man reborn, smug, Botox smooth smile on his face after feeling like he dodged a murder charge, which, I mean, technically he did at this point. He believed that his money, his charm, his alibi, he thought he never thought he was getting caught. And he didn't. In the moment, it looked like he was right. Prosecutors were like, no fucking way. They understood that obviously Dave Shepard recanting had sabotaged the first case, but they also knew something else now. They didn't need Big Dave. Not anymore. Because while they still had all the things they had in the first trial, the silver bars, which tracked back to Mike Dixon, the murder weapon found in the lake registered to Mike Dixon's brother, the Gatorade bottle with Big Dave's DNA, a ton of weird, creepy texts, nothing that was, nothing said specifically, yes, go kill him, but it was implied. And then, of course, Dave Shepard's confession that included details only the killer would know, even though Dave has not recanted that. So they still had all of this, which they had in the first trial. But now they had another weapon in their arsenal. And her name was Haley Shepard, Big Dave's daughter. And at first in my head, I was like, when I was learning about this, I thought, is that really going to be enough? Like, what's she going to bring to the case? Why wasn't the evidence enough in the first trial, even if Dave recanted? And, I came to understand that because Dave recanting completely destroyed the entire narrative. They had built their case around Mike being the mastermind. And now their star witness, who was going to corroborate that, had taken all the blame, which made all the evidence look even more circumstantial. The gun, sure, it was registered to Mike's brother, but like it could have been stolen. Big Dave could have taken it. The texts, nothing explicit enough there. The confession, it could have been given under duress, and now it's been recanted. So without Dave backing up the story, the jury just didn't have enough in that first trial. But at trial 2, Dave didn't testify, but his daughter Haley did. And that changed everything. Haley took the stand and told the jury something simple but devastating to the case. That after the murder, her dad had money. And that was weird. Really weird. He'd been flat broke, the kind of broke where like going out to eat, not an option. Buying new tires for Haley's car because she desperately needed them, that's a fantasy. Wasn't going to happen. But suddenly, right after July 11th, Big Dave was taking Haley out for expensive dinners, bought her a brand new cell phone, replaced all of her tires. I mean, granted, this man had only just come into $9,000. Now, look, if I came into $9,000 now, I don't even know what I would, well, I would pay all my bills and I would sleep restfully without worry for once. But, he's acting like he just won the $1 million lottery. He's like throwing money around like crazy. And Haley kept saying, like, Dad, where's this money coming from? And Big Dave said, I did some work for Mike and he paid me early, but don't ask what I did for him. Okay, weird. She wasn't the only one. Haley wasn't the only one who noticed Dave like being real flashy with this newfound money. His ex-wife told investigators same thing. All of a sudden, Dave, like immediately after July 11th, Dave is like flaunting new cash. It's not millions, but it was enough to be weird because he was so broke before. So this time the prosecution felt like we don't need a dramatic confession or testimony from Big Dave because we have logic, forensics, and the one thing that Mike Dixon had always considered his secret weapon, his ego. Because against the advice of every single person with a law degree or even any knowledge of the law, Mike Dixon took the stand in his own defense at the second trial. Yeah, he thought he could talk his way out of this murder for hire charge that was he was being accused of. And at first, it kind of worked. Like he was smooth, charismatic, he said all the right things. He was just charming enough. He was believable. Again, at first, because then he kept talking, and the longer he talked, the more he talked. He over explained, deflected, got snippy at like in his own story at himself. Then he started playing the victim. There was just, he talked and talked and talked himself into being unbelievable. So slowly but surely, the jury began to see that he was manipulative, a narcissist, and a man who saw women and possibly everyone else as completely disposable. One juror later said that Mike Dixon's ego was larger than life, and that every time he tried to talk about morality, it was like watching a cartoon villain read the Bible. Another said he dug his own grave with that testimony. It took the jury 3 hours to reach a verdict: guilty of murder for hire, guilty of masterminding a twisted, ego driven plot to punish the woman who didn't love him back. Mike Dixon was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And this time when he left the courtroom, he wasn't smiling. But just when Joseph's family thought it was finally over, just when they were able to take a deep breath and believe that justice had finally been served, the rug got ripped out from under them again. Because 2 years later, Mike's lawyers filed an appeal. And somehow, in a maddening twist of legal fate, they found not one, but two technicalities buried in the trial that they were going to use to try and get it overturned, get his conviction overturned. Technicality number one was a closed courtroom. So Dixon's defense claimed that his right to a public trial had been violated because on 3 occasions, the judge temporarily closed the courtroom to spectators. These weren't days-long closures. They weren't like malicious closures. It was procedural, brief closures, moments when the court needed to limit entry because of space or sensitive topics. Yet the Texas Seventh Court of Appeals ruled that those closures, however small, were enough to call the entire trial into question. What's more annoying is that at the time, like during the trial, when the judge closed the courtroom, Dixon and his defense team never objected, not once. But the Texas Seventh Court of Appeals said, yeah, it's a problem. Technicality number two had to do with cell phone data. Investigators had used Mike's cell phone location data to help establish the timeline, showing that he wasn't in Lubbock at the time of the murder, but that he had been in contact with Dave Shepard throughout the planning stages. But then in 2017, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision in Carpenter versus the United States, which ruled that obtaining cell site location information without a warrant violated the Fourth Amendment. So even though the murder happened in 2012, the trial happened in 2015, and the phone records were barely relevant, honestly. They were a very small part of the case. But the court decided to apply this new law retroactively, which meant that the phone data was now inadmissible. And just like that, in 2020, Mike Dixon's conviction was overturned. He was released from prison, put on house arrest with a GPS ankle monitor. He was free to sleep in his own bed, get takeout, and play the role of the wronged man all over again. Obviously, for Joseph's family, for Rochelle, this was gut wrenching. They'd sat through 2 trials, years of appeals, and now they were waiting again now for a third trial. Like, unbelievable. Luckily, the Texas Attorney General's office took over the appeal and they said, cell phone data? Yeah, not really central to the conviction. The courtroom closures? Dixon never objected. You can't raise an issue on appeal that you didn't even complain about at the time. So, finally, in 2022, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed. They reinstated Dixon's conviction, life in prison without parole, final, done, no more appeals, no more loopholes. Mike Dixon, the plastic surgeon with a God complex, was once again behind bars, and this time for good. When the final gavel dropped and Mike Dixon's life sentence was reinstated, there was no applause in the courtroom. It was just like a heavy collective sigh of exhausted relief. For Joseph Saunier's sons, James and Dallas, I mean, they'd been living in this nightmare for over a decade. They'd lost in that decade both of their parents to murder in 2 completely unrelated incidents. I mean, this just blows my mind. 2 separate murders, 2 separate cities, 2 separate killers. July 12th, 2010, their mother, Becky, was murdered in Amarillo by the man she left Joseph for. July 11th, 2012, so just like 2 years and one day difference. Their father was murdered in Lubbock by a man hired by the ex of the woman he fell in love with. One day shy of the 2-year anniversary of Becky's death, Joseph was murdered. It's like a level of tragedy that it feels just cosmic in its cruelty. Not to mention that these kids, Joseph's kids, had to sit through not one, not two, but 3 separate trials before their dad got justice. At one point, Dallas Saunier, who actually is a movie producer in Hollywood now, he told reporters, I had to clean the blood from my mother's home, and 2 years later, I had to clean the blood from my father's home. I mean, awful. Rochelle, um, the public was pretty cruel to Rochelle, actually. The early media coverage painted her as a gold digger initially, a woman who drove 2 men mad with her beauty and charm. You know, it was kind of classic misogynistic garbage. Nobody talked about it in the media initially. Nobody talked about that she was a single mom trying to rebuild her life, that she was stalked, manipulated, that she lost the love of her life in this horrible murder. Um, and that she had to grieve while the media kind of painted her out to be this like gold digger. She eventually filed a defamation lawsuit against Dixon, fighting back against the narrative that she was some like scheming seductress. And she won, but, the trauma can't be reversed with a court ruling. So don't know much what happened to her. She's stayed mostly out of the spotlight, living a quiet life. And Big Dave Shepard is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. He took the plea deal after his confession, which got him locked up for good. But even behind bars, he couldn't stop spinning stories, apparently. After he recanted and sabotaged the first trial, he spent years dodging interviews, refusing to explain why he lied. Even when his own daughters confronted him about it. And therefore, his daughters supported Joseph's family during the remaining trials. And they believed that their father wasn't only a liar, that he was a killer. They fully believed that, which he was. Um, yeah, he killed a man for 3 silver bars. And then there's Joseph, of course, the man at the heart of this story, the father, grandfather, doctor, dancer, a kind man who finally found joy after unimaginable heartbreak, only to have it all ripped away by someone else's ego. Joseph's friends and family remember him not as a victim, but as a man who lived fully, who loved music, perfume, travel, wine, his grandkids, and had just begun to start loving Rochelle. And he didn't obviously deserve any of this. This wasn't a crime of impulse or passion. This was a murder born from entitlement, from the belief that if I can't have her, no one can. So, what do we take from all of this? Ego can be a dangerous thing. And of course, control is not love. And that justice, while slow and infuriating in this case, can still be served eventually. And that is it for today's episode. Thank you for listening to Death by Southwest. As always, thoughts and prayers go out to Joseph's entire family, Rochelle and her family, and anyone else who was affected by this very, very tragic story. Yeah, that's it. So thanks, guys. If you are loving Death by Southwest, please subscribe, follow, leave a review, comment on Spotify. You can also check out Patreon for a lot more behind the scenes kind of life stuff. And I'll be back next week with more true crime. As always, stay curious, stay safe, stay out of the desert after dark. Oh, and if anyone ever tries to give you a Tea of the Month subscription as a birthday gift, run. Bye, guys.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, "Good night and good luck."